You are watching DHTV from California State University, Dominguez Hills.
Okay, this is part two of the Gilded Age. And what we're going to deal with here in the Gilded Age is what is known as the Second Great Wave. And this is the immigrants that are going to be coming to the United States between 1880 to 1920. They're going to be identified as the Second Great Wave. Now, it is in this era of deceit and deception and disillusionment that the Second Great Wave begins to arrive. Now, the Second Great Wave of immigrants to this country occurred between 1880 to 1920. Now, why is immigration so important to the United States? Because it is a conscious policy created at the federal level and designed to bring labor forces to the United States for industrialization. Businesses need workers, hence immigration policies. Now, in the Gilded Age, between 1875 to 1900, approximately 14 million people entered the United States. And then in the 20th century, during the Progressive Era, approximately 18 million will arrive between the years 1900 and 1920. Now, the difference in the immigrants coming in during this era known as the Second Great Wave is that those who came before the Civil War, who was known as the First Great Wave, they're arriving from Northern and Western Europe. The people who arrived after the Civil War are distinctively different than those who arrived previously. The people are usually coming from subsistence economies or what are known as non-industrialized societies. See, Eastern and Southern Europe does not experience big cities like Paris, London, or Amsterdam of the North and West of Europe. There is no industry. And most often these people are coming from a feudal order. So let's take a look at a documentary that helps us appreciate the Southern and Eastern European immigrant experience.
Over 12 million men, women, and children passed this way. Passed through rooms and corridors haunted with a special stillness which remains only in places once noisy with human life. Here they bought tickets for 1,000 places in America. Here they traded their drachmas, their liras, and their rubles for dollars. Here they sang their first American songs, experienced their first American Christmas and Hanukkah. Here they waited to be given permission to pass over to the new land. Tens of millions of us have relatives who came this way. Sat in this room, part of the largest human migration in history. Of the many who came, some were turned away. But even they would leave part of themselves in America to remind us why they had come so far. Why they had made the journey.
You never know how hard it was to leave her. That was the hardest thing I think I ever had to do.
She said, if you leave, why, I don't ever want you to come back again.
long, hard life. It was.
Europe had always lost its children to America. And now there were new reasons to leave. Industrial change and political unrest had brought increased joblessness and poverty to Italy and Southern Europe. And reaching as far north as the industrial cities of Poland and Russia. In America, they were saying, there was a future, perhaps a fortune to be made. In the southern European ports of Naples, Piraeus, Trieste, and Constantinople, they gathered to board the ships to America. Some were birds of passage, leaving to seek work and return. Others with hopes to find at the end of the journey the good permanent life that awaited, they were told, 3,000 miles across the sea. In the rural areas of Eastern Europe, they had, in addition to poverty, other reasons to look to America. The government was taking young boys to the army. In a mother's lifetime, she might not see him again. And always there was the police, the historic persecutor of the Armenian, Slovak, and Jew.
You know what I see now? I see the peasant with a wagon and hay to take me away. The whole town was around my wagon. Everybody came to say goodbye. I didn't know how to say goodbye.
Poland, Russia, Romania, and everybody just wanted to get out of there.
Making their way to the railheads, they sought passage to the sea. Some had money for the journey, and some did not. But turning back was seldom an alternative.
I didn't pay no tickets. Get out on the train and pray for luck.
They carried us just like you would carry a load of a bunch of pigs. If you're gonna move a bunch of calves or a bunch of pigs, would you put them in a passenger car? That's the way they looked at us.
For many, entering the great port cities of Northern Europe was like entering a new world. They had reached the sea, and the immigrant was now in the hands of the steamship company.
Industrialization for these immigrants introduces a process known as assimilation to the American mainstream. There is a sense of identity in the United States that is bound up with these immigrant experiences. And one of the reasons why every American can relate to the immigrant process has to do with the second great wave of immigrants. What this signifies for later generations is that the immigrant experience is related to a process of change known as assimilation. And there seems to be a three-generational process of change occurring. The first generation, especially if one was older, are going to maintain their identities. They'll maintain their language, their culture, their religious practices, and they will do it on purpose. The second generation tended to repudiate the old ways because they faced the pressures of assimilation. And then the third generation tries to create a sense of balance between the two, because the third generation can't communicate with their grandparents because their grandparents speak a different language. And the third generation, not like the second generation, which is bilingual, the third generation just speaks English. So this process is easy to oversimplify because it depends on the age that one comes to the United States and the size of the ethnic population already established here. And furthermore, this process of assimilation identifies the European experience only. Europeans refer to this process as the melting pot. But this melting pot, you must understand, is racially defined. The melting pot experience has nothing to do with the African, it has nothing to do with the Asian, and the Mexican and Latino experience is a little bit different. So this three-generational assimilation experience, or melting pot phenomenon, is strictly a European and a Mediterranean situation. Now, why are these immigrants coming? They sought to escape political and religious persecution. Jews were restricted in their civil rights in Russia. Slavic people experienced similar tragedies in the Balkans. Italians and Greeks were suffering under brutal regimes. Now, most Eastern and Southern European countries were barely entering the industrialization process, where commercial agriculture ousted the subsistence producer from their lands and forced them to move to urban centers not quite ready to take off into industrial capitalism, thereby creating overpopulation in European cities. Labor recruiters in Europe painted a picture of the United States as the ideal place to survive. And compared to Europe, wages were higher in the United States, and public education, which was a necessity to train workers in the language of the market so that they can follow instructions, was available on a large scale. How did they get here? The majority came to New York, Boston, through Ellis Island. The steamship cost $30 on average and usually took 2 weeks to get here. Let's go back to the documentary and let's appreciate their journey on the steamship.
Immigrants from the east and north swarmed into Bremen, Antwerp, Hamburg, and Liverpool to be processed for the passage to America. They stood in line together, those who saw America as an adventure, those who saw America as a beacon of hope. It was a business of numbers, an operation designed to house, feed, and process 4,000 people at a time, to identify those whom American authorities might reject and return to Europe at steamship expense.
First thing they do with you is delouse you. Look, your hair all over. Your hair, if there was a net in your hair, you would have to have shampoo.
Fearing epidemics, huge facilities were established to fumigate clothing, baggage, and people. Processed and ticketed, they waited for their ship. They boarded in many parts of Europe and in many kinds of vessels, most to New York and some to other ports. But they had one thing in common. They were traveling steerage, and the steamship companies understood the profit in numbers. They began a journey that could last from a week to a month.
That was the last time it ever ran again. That was the last trip she made. She should have never made that one either.
For some, it would be a voyage without incident. For others, the crossing would provide days for which they were ill-prepared.
They gave us a tin plate with a fork and a spoon, a cup of soup, and that much bread, 15 days. There's all one big home.
I was in the cellar. There's little lights going on there all the time. Little lights. We were riding in the steerage, like animals.
You could see a lot of water, but we didn't see the sky. No sky.
To escape the throbbing engines and the odor of spoiled food, those with blankets came on deck for air.
She was sick all the time. People didn't know where the toilets were, and so they'd use it. It was a terrible life.
I prayed one night that that ship would go down. It was so horrible. It had to stop for a while. For some, you know, the waves was washing. I was very sick. God, I prayed it to go down.
There's only one thing in my mind. I wanted to get out of there and to come to America.
It appeared like in a fog, and everybody went over to the railing and just admiring.
I thought I was in heaven. My God, is this a city on earth, or this is a city in heaven? Never seen a building that big, but beautiful. I have to cry.
Everybody was just waiting to get off that, standing waiting to get off that ship. You were just wondering where you were coming to or what was going to happen to you, you know, in your mind.
Still separated from the first class and cabin passengers who were processed by immigration officials on board, the immigrant from steerage waited yet another boat ride. This one from the Hudson River Pier to an island in the Upper Bay. Crowded into barges and ferries, they approached the place that had become a legend in their mind.
I couldn't get my eyes on that. It's great.
I was kind of glad to see Alice Island as bad as it was. It was good to see any kind of land. It was.
According to the houses I left in my town, this was like, like a whole city. And I almost felt smaller than I am.
But when I came through these doors, I saw all these people there. I figured, well, I guess I'll have to stay here for good, probably, because all these people, what are they doing here? And nobody was happy. You don't know what's going to happen.
I had a coat and a dress,
and a pair of shoes. That's it.
One suitcase I had with me. And about $50, I guess.
My basket, my little basket, that's all I had with me.
You were lucky to have the one.
We had no other possessions but that. We had no baggage. We had nothing.
Nothing, except the clothes. We had nothing.
Clinging to their possessions, they entered the great building and climbed the stairs.
So, as they entered, they had to take a very demeaning physical exam for glaucoma and tuberculosis. And then they had to take a paper exam so that the United States could weed out potential anarchists, socialists, and most importantly, prostitutes. There were several aid societies that assisted them in socializing in the industrialization process. And what did they do? Well, they were the labor forces for the modern factories in steel, coal, meatpacking, railroads, and the army. The army needs soldiers to remove the native peoples from the land. They were unskilled and they were paid miserable wages. Promotion and acquisition of skills were not available to them. And there was tension with those immigrants who are already here. And we can appreciate why the first generation of immigrants will refuse to assimilate. They learned what the black, the Asian, the native, and the Mexican already knew about the United States. That discrimination comes in many forms: economic, political, social, racial, and gender. There was an association between their occupations and their ethnicities. Jews were concentrated in the garment industry, and Slavic peoples worked in the coal mines, while Italians worked in various factories in the transportation industry. So let's go back and let's end this particular segment, part 2, with understanding their experiences as they entered the United States.
Jesus, Mary and Joseph, I says, where am I?
They would come right into the big hall, and there they were told to sit and stay there. And they didn't know where they were. It was a new land, but they hadn't been in land. It was just a big hall. And all you could get was tears and crying of the children.
For the vast majority, the process would last less than a day. But now they waited. Those from Europe and the Near East, with those who had arrived from the Caribbean. Those who were the first in their family to come to America, with those who would be met. Those who came to make money in return, with those who were determined never to return.
So they all had this fear, this worry. They were worried about police, because they were always checked in the other countries.
The word government frightened me. Government was tyranny. Government was officers who looked at you with the sense that they wanted to hate you or eliminate you. And the idea that there is democracy or that the policeman will help you was very new to me. A policeman, to me, was someone who could cut my head off.
It was the most dangerous thing for everybody to go through it. The ice.
Trachoma, the dreaded disease of the immigrant, the diagnosis for which could lead to almost certain deportation.
If there's anything that put a chalk mark here, chalk mark there.
Those identified to be set aside for possible rejection represented a small percentage examined each day. But this was little consolation to a family separated.
You didn't have to know the people, but you know that somebody's missing. The agony they went through. So you know that somebody's missing in the family.
All of a sudden, the thought, my goodness, they're separating us, because that's what the police always did. They separated the men from the women and then took care of the women and children. As long as some member of the family, some loving member of the family was with you, life was tolerable. You lived in a relationship of family love. Even though the other members of the family, you didn't know where they were, you could converse, you could plan, you could warm each other.
I had a feeling that I'm left all alone. It's a terrible feeling. All of a sudden they were gone.
America did not want the burden of an unhealthy immigrant. America wanted a person who could make a living and was not bringing into the country an infectious disease.
And they looked your back over and your lungs and your heart and everything. And you were sent from one to the other, one doctor to the other.
And a lot of people was put away on the side.
I wouldn't want to have been sent back.
People were rejected because they showed outward signs of illness, what they considered mental difficulties. We didn't call it psychiatry, they called it neurology. And we said, we're sorry. And the ship that brought them had to take them back. That was a tragedy.
I decided if they ever have to send me back, I'll jump down to the water and never go back to Russia. I never want to see it again.
Built for 1,500, the dining room often fed 3,000.
There would be dishes and forks and knives and white napkin, long tables, well set. But when the people went in, it was like chaos. And they handed us food. Food was not something people gave you. I didn't like it, but then I tasted it again. I never had seen a banana before.
To me, this white bread was like cake already.
At night, Ellis served as a dormitory for thousands, waiting the new day. Each morning, the great hall would fill, and the noise would begin again. Hopefully, their papers were in order, a clean bill of health, a letter from a relative guaranteeing they would not become a public charge, proof that they were not a contract laborer or a dangerous alien. In adjacent rooms, the detained were given additional scrutiny and an opportunity to make their case. But accepting an appeal to Washington, the Board of Inquiry was the rejected immigrant's last chance. Through an interpreter, they did their best to persuade him to overcome the complexities of a changing immigration law. But it was in the Great Hall where the vast majority faced their first and their last test. In his hand, the man at the registry desk held the ship's manifest. In his power, the right to interpret questions intended to identify those who should be let in or kept out.
They know a word of English.
I couldn't understand English, not one word.
First question, how much money have you got?
She had to have £5. My father, I remember, gave me that £5.
Do you know how long? It took a couple of years, 2 and 3 years, to get that $25.
My mother, when we got nearer and the person at the desk called our names, my mother turned to me, she says, I was never here. How does she know my name? I said, it's all right, Mom. She knows it.
They asked me my name, and I told them Licht, and they say, how do you spell it? Well, I didn't know how to spell it, and they didn't know it, and they spelled it L-I-C-H-T. I said, it's all right for me, I don't know the difference.
But then they said, all right, you can go.
You're free to go.
To Hoboken. Yeah.
There would still be questions of what food to buy for the railroad trip to Chicago and the boat trip to Boston. There was still the strange names, the strange numbers, and the fear of losing one's money. There was the process of buying a ticket to places with unpronounceable names like Pittsburgh, Hamtramck, and Keokuk. But those were details. The island had passed them through. The door to America had opened.
It was as if God's great promise had been fulfilled.
I'm going into a free land. I don't think I ever can explain that feeling that I had that time. There isn't such a thing to be explained. It came out of my system. It's over.
It's not my native land, but it means more to me than my native land. It means more to me than my native land.
Any country on earth, this never happened. And become a human being again. It's a miracle.
I'm glad I'm here. Couldn't be any better, could it?
And everybody had hopes. And one thing I was sure, and thousands like me, that the degradation, the abuse, and the privation that we had in Europe, we wouldn't have here.
Oh, God, yes. Hoping for centuries.